The doors of the Apostolic Palace slammed shut at 2 in the morning. Inside, a cardinal who had served Rome for over 30 years stood before Pope Leo XIV and heard 3 words that would destroy his entire career. "You are finished." By dawn, every trace of Cardinal Domenico Rossetti would begin vanishing from the Vatican, and not a single person inside those walls tried to stop it. Before we continue with this story, if you are new here, please click the subscribe button, hit the like, and comment where you are watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps us bring you more content like this every single week. Now, let us get back to what happened inside the Vatican. It started on the night of July 1st, 2026. A phone call not to the Pope, not to the Secretary of State. The call went to a journalist in Milan, a well-known investigative reporter named Giuliana Ferro. She had been covering Vatican finances for nearly a decade and had broken 2 major corruption stories in the past. So when her phone rang at 11 at night from an unknown Vatican extension, she picked up immediately. The voice on the other end was shaking. A mid-level official inside the administration of the Patrimony of the Apostolic See. He said he had found something that could not wait. He had been digitizing old transaction records as part of Pope Leo's new financial transparency initiative, the same reform that had restructured the Vatican's financial watchdog agency just days earlier. And buried inside a series of dormant accounts, he found a pattern. 17 wire transfers spanning 4 years, totaling over 11 million, all routed through a shell entity registered in Luxembourg, and every single transfer carried the same internal authorization code, a code that traced back to one man, Cardinal Domenico Rossetti, the prefect of the dicastery for the economy. Ferro asked the official to repeat the number. 11 million. He confirmed it. She asked where the money had gone. He paused. Then he said something that made her grip the phone tighter. The funds had been funneled into private real estate holdings across southern France, luxury apartments, a vineyard near Aix-en-Provence, a villa overlooking the Mediterranean, all purchased under corporate names, all untraceable without the internal Vatican codes. She asked why he was calling her, and not the Pope. He said he had tried. He had submitted a report through the new internal compliance system Leo XIV had established, and the report had been buried. Someone inside the dicastery had intercepted it, deleted it from the system. He had a backup copy. He wanted it out, and he wanted it out now. Ferro told him not to send anything digitally. She told him to make a physical copy, put it in an envelope, and leave it at a specific cafe near Piazza Navona the next morning. He agreed. But what neither of them knew was that the call had already been flagged. Inside the Vatican's restructured Supervisory and Financial Information Authority, the new monitoring protocols that Leo XIV had signed into law just 48 hours earlier were already active. The system had detected the outgoing call from a Vatican line to a known journalist. An alert was generated, and that alert went directly to the desk of Archbishop Matteo Contrini, the newly appointed head of the Vatican's Internal Compliance Division. Contrini read the alert at 6 in the morning on July 2nd. He did not call Rossetti. He did not call the Secretary of State. He picked up a secure line and dialed the private residence of Pope Leo XIV. The Pope answered on the second ring. He had been awake since 4:30. Those who worked closely with him knew this was typical. Robert Francis Prevost had been an early riser since his seminary days in Chicago. He listened to Contrini without interrupting. When the Archbishop finished, the Pope asked a single question. "Do you have independent confirmation of the transfers?" Contrini said he had partial confirmation. The new internal system had already flagged 3 of the 17 transactions during a routine audit the previous week. They had been marked for review but not yet escalated. Now, combined with the whistleblower's report, the picture was becoming clear. Leo XIV told Contrini to do 3 things. First, secure all digital records related to the flagged transactions. Second, contact the Vatican Gendarmerie and have them place a quiet hold on Rossetti's diplomatic passport. Third, come to the Apostolic Palace at 9 that morning. Bring everything. And then the Pope said something that would set the tone for everything that followed. No leaks, no politics, just truth. By 9 in the morning, 4 people sat in the Pope's private study. Leo XIV, Archbishop Contrini, Cardinal Secretary of State Pietro Parolin, and Sister Alessandra Smarilli, the newly confirmed prefect of the Dicastery for Integral Human Development, who had deep expertise in Vatican financial systems from her previous role. Contrini presented the evidence, the 17 transfers, the shell company in Luxembourg, the real estate portfolio in France, the intercepted compliance report, the whistleblower's testimony. The room was silent for nearly a full minute after he finished. Parolin spoke first. He said this was an extraordinarily sensitive matter. Cardinal Rossetti had been a fixture of the Roman Curia for decades. He had served under 3 popes. He had allies across every dicastery, every congregation, every council. Moving against him without absolute certainty would create a firestorm that could destabilize the entire reform agenda. Sister Smarilli disagreed. She said the new financial transparency statutes that Leo had signed were meaningless if they were not enforced. The entire point of restructuring the agency was to catch exactly this kind of activity. If the Vatican hesitated now, the reforms would be seen as theater, window dressing, nothing more. Leo XIV listened to both arguments. Then he leaned forward in his chair and spoke with the kind of quiet intensity that his closest advisors had come to recognize as his most dangerous mode. "We did not restructure these institutions so they could gather dust," he said. "If the evidence holds, there will be consequences, and those consequences will be visible." He asked Contrini how quickly a full forensic audit could be completed. Contrini said 48 hours if they had full access to the dicastery servers. Leo authorized it immediately. He told Parolin to inform the Vatican commander personally. No one in Rosetti's office was to delete, move, or transfer any files. Any attempt to do so would be treated as obstruction. Then the Pope made a decision that surprised even Parolin. He said he wanted to speak to Rossetti directly that afternoon before the audit was complete. Parolin asked why. Leo's answer was simple: "Because I want to look him in the eyes and give him a chance to tell the truth." Cardinal Domenico Rossetti arrived at the Apostolic Palace at 3 p.m. on July 2nd. He had not been told the reason for the meeting. His secretary had received only a brief message from the papal household. "The Holy Father requests your presence at 1500 hours. No agenda was provided." Rossetti was 67 years old, tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. He had been ordained in Milan, risen through the ranks of the Italian episcopate, and been elevated to the College of Cardinals by Pope Francis in 2023. He had survived every Vatican power shift of the last 3 decades by being useful to whoever sat on the throne of St. Peter. But what he walked into that afternoon was something he had never experienced. Leo XIV was alone in the study. No aides, no secretary, no cardinal witness. Just the Pope sitting behind a simple wooden desk with a single manila folder in front of him. Rossetti entered with his usual confident smile. He began with a pleasantry about the weather. Leo did not smile back. He gestured to the chair across from him and said, "Sit down, Domenico." The use of his first name without title was the first signal that something was deeply wrong. Leo opened the folder. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a print out of one of the wire transfers. Dated March 15th, 2024. Amount €840,000. Destination a corporate entity in Luxembourg called Greystone Holdings S.A. "Tell me about this," Leo said. Rossetti looked at the paper. His expression did not change immediately, but his right hand resting on the arm of the chair tightened just slightly, just enough. He said he was not familiar with the specific transaction. He said the dicastery for the economy processed thousands of transfers every year. He could not be expected to recall everyone. Leo slid a second sheet across, another transfer, different date, same destination, same authorization code, Rossetti's code. And this one, Rossetti's composure began to fracture. He said, "There must be an error. Authorization codes could be reassigned. Systems were imperfect." He suggested that perhaps a subordinate had used his credentials. Leo placed his hand flat on the desk. "Domenico, I am not asking you to explain a system error. I am asking you to explain 11 million euros in Vatican funds that ended up in your personal real estate portfolio in southern France." The silence in that room lasted 10 seconds, but those 10 seconds told the Pope everything he needed to know. Rossetti did not deny it. He did not confirm it either. Instead, he did something that revealed his true character. He pivoted to power. He leaned forward and said very quietly that the Pope should be careful. He said he had relationships that stretched across the Curia. He said certain cardinals would not take kindly to what could be perceived as a politically motivated attack on a senior member of the college. He said the timing coming so soon after the Vatican's financial reforms would look like a purge. He said the media would have questions. He said the faithful would be confused, and then he made a threat that crossed every line. He said he knew things about certain financial arrangements made during the previous pontificate, things that had been quietly settled, things that if surfaced would embarrass not just the Church, but several sitting cardinals who were close allies of the current Pope. Leo XIV did not blink. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean back. He looked directly at Cardinal Rossetti and said 6 words that would echo through the halls of the Vatican for years: "This church will not be blackmailed." He stood up. He walked to the window, and with his back turned to Rossetti, he delivered the verdict. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of all duties as prefect of the dicastery for the economy. Your access to Vatican systems, archives, and facilities is revoked. You will vacate your residence within the Vatican walls by midnight tomorrow. You are forbidden from entering Vatican City or any extraterritorial property of the Holy See until further notice, and you will cooperate fully with the forensic audit currently underway. If you refuse, this matter will be referred to civil authorities in both Italy and Luxembourg." Rossetti stood up. His face was pale. He started to speak, but Leo turned from the window and cut him off. "You had 30 years to serve this church with integrity. You chose otherwise. That choice has consequences. You may go." Rossetti stood there for a moment. His mouth opened, then closed. He straightened his cassock. He tugged at the ring on his finger, the cardinal's ring he had worn for 3 years. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. But just before he reached it, he stopped. He turned back and he said one last thing. "You will regret this, Holy Father. The Church does not forget those who tear it apart from within." Leo XIV did not move from the window. He did not turn around. He simply said, "The Church will remember who stole from the poor to buy vineyards." Rossetti left the Apostolic Palace at 3:47 in the afternoon. 2 Swiss guards escorted him to the entrance. They had not been told why. They simply received the order. The cardinal walked between them in silence, his red zucchetto slightly askew, his face the color of ash. By 4 o'clock, his electronic access credentials had been deactivated. Every door he had walked through for years now denied his badge. His Vatican email account was locked. His internal messaging profiles were suspended. The digital footprint of a 30-year career was being erased in real time. By 4:30, the Vatican Gendarmerie commander dispatched 6 officers to Rossetti's office in the Dicastery for the Economy. They arrived with a court order signed by the Pope himself under his temporal authority as sovereign of Vatican City State. The officers secured every hard drive, every filing cabinet, every USB device. Rossetti's personal assistant, a young priest who had served him for 5 years, watched in stunned silence as they carried out boxes of documents. By 5 o'clock, the gendarmerie had sealed the office with Vatican security tape. A notice was placed on the door: access restricted by order of the Holy Father, no entry without written authorization from the Apostolic Palace. By 6 o'clock, his diplomatic passport had been formally suspended through a coordinated request to the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The request was handled personally by Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who made the call from his own office. It was a brief clinical conversation. The Italians did not push back. They had been expecting something like this ever since Leo's financial reforms had been announced, and by 8 o'clock that evening, the first rumors began to leak. Not from the Pope's office, not from Contrini's team. The leak came from inside Rossetti's own network. A cardinal in his circle, panicking at the speed of events, had called a colleague in the Italian Bishops' Conference, who in turn had called a contact at Corriere della Sera. Within an hour, the Italian press was ablaze with speculation. The Vatican press office, led by Matteo Bruni, issued a statement at 10 o'clock that night. It was 3 sentences long. It confirmed that Cardinal Rossetti had been relieved of his duties. It stated that a financial review was underway, and it said the Holy Father would have no further comment at this time. 3 sentences, and they detonated like a bomb. Within an hour, the Vatican press office phone lines were overwhelmed. Journalists from CNN, BBC, Reuters, Al Jazeera, and every major Italian newspaper were calling simultaneously. Bruni's team of 4 communications officers worked through the night, repeating the same 3 sentences over and over. No additional comment, no background briefing, no anonymous sources, but the silence from the Vatican only amplified the noise outside it. Italian television ran breaking news banners through the night. Vatican analysts who had not been called for comment in months were suddenly on every talk show. Social media exploded with theories, opinions, and wild speculation. Some called it a purge. Others called it justice. A hashtag began trending in Italian that roughly translated to "the Pope cleans house." By midnight, it had been shared over 200,000 times, and in a small apartment in Parioli, Cardinal Rossetti sat in the dark, watching it all unfold on a television screen. He had not eaten since morning. His phone rang constantly. He answered none of the calls. At one point, his sister called from Lyon. He picked up that one. He spoke for less than a minute. Then he put the phone down and stared at the wall. By the morning of July 3rd, every major news organization in the world was running the story. The headlines ranged from factual to sensational, but the core narrative was the same. The Pope had moved against one of the most powerful cardinals in the Vatican. He had done it swiftly. He had done it quietly. And he had done it alone. But Leo XIV was not done. At 7 in the morning, before the media frenzy reached its peak, the Pope convened an emergency meeting in the Sala Bologna. Present were the heads of every major dicastery: Parolin, Smerilli, the prefects of doctrine, evangelization, clergy, and bishops. 12 senior officials in total, plus Archbishop Contrini, with the preliminary findings of the forensic audit. The audit was damning. In less than 24 hours, the forensic team had confirmed 14 of the 17 suspicious transfers. They had identified the Luxembourg Shell Company. It led through 2 layers of corporate anonymity before arriving at a trust registered in Rosette's sister's name. The real estate portfolio in southern France was worth an estimated 9.3 million euros at current market value. An additional 1.7 million euros remained in liquid accounts connected to the trust. Contrini also revealed a second discovery that no one had expected. The compliance report that the whistleblower had said was deleted from the system had not actually been destroyed. It had been rerouted to a private server maintained by Rosette's deputy, a Monsignor named Franco Bellucci. Bellucci had been intercepting compliance alerts for at least 18 months, filtering out anything that might trigger scrutiny of the Cardinal's activities. When Contrini finished his presentation, the room was heavy with the weight of what had been revealed. This was not just one man's corruption. It was a system of concealment that had operated within the very institution designed to prevent it. Leo XIV addressed the dicastery heads directly. His voice was calm but carried an edge that none of them had heard before. "What happened here is not an anomaly," he said. "It is a symptom. We restructured the agency. We signed new transparency statutes. We built compliance systems. And still, a cardinal was able to operate a private financial network inside our walls for years. That tells me our reforms are not finished. That tells me our culture is not yet changed." He paused. Then he continued, "I did not come to this office to protect reputations. I came here to serve the truth. And the truth is that this church has tolerated too much for too long. That ends now. Not tomorrow. Not after a committee reviews it. Now." He announced 3 immediate measures. First, Monsignor Bellucci would be suspended and referred to a canonical tribunal for his role in obstructing the compliance system. Second, a full independent audit of every dicastery's financial operations would be launched within 30 days, overseen by an external team with no ties to the Curia. Third, any cardinal or bishop who had knowledge of Rosette's activities and failed to report them would face canonical inquiry. The third measure sent a visible tremor through the room. Several of the dicastery heads exchanged glances. Everyone understood the implication. The Pope was not just punishing one man, he was putting the entire system on notice. Parolin, to his credit, supported the measures publicly in that meeting. Whatever private reservations he may have had, he understood that the moment required unity. He stood and said that the Secretariat of State would cooperate fully with the independent audit and encouraged every dicastery to do the same. But not everyone was so compliant. Within hours of the meeting, resistance began to organize. 3 cardinals, all Italian, all with long ties to Rossetti, began making phone calls. They called colleagues in Milan, Naples, and Palermo. They called contacts in the Italian political establishment. They called journalists sympathetic to the traditionalist wing of the church. Their argument was not that Rossetti was innocent. They were too smart for that. Their argument was about process. They said the Pope had acted unilaterally. They said he had not consulted the College of Cardinals. They said the banishment from Vatican City was unprecedented and possibly exceeded papal authority under canon law. They said the Pope was creating a dangerous precedent where any cardinal could be expelled on the basis of a preliminary investigation. It was a clever strategy. By framing the issue as a matter of procedure rather than substance, they hoped to shift the narrative away from Rosette's corruption and toward the Pope's methods. But Leo XIV had anticipated this, and what he did next demonstrated why those who underestimated him always regretted it. On the afternoon of July 3rd, the Pope released a handwritten letter. Not through the press office, not through the Secretariat of State. He released it directly through the Vatican's official website, a scanned image of his own handwriting in Italian, with an English translation provided simultaneously. The letter was addressed to the faithful, all of them, every Catholic in the world. It was 4 paragraphs long. In the first paragraph, he acknowledged that a senior cardinal had been removed from his position due to evidence of serious financial misconduct. He did not name Rossetti. He did not need to. Everyone already knew. In the second paragraph, he explained that the decision had been made after reviewing evidence gathered through the Vatican's own reformed financial oversight systems. He said the systems had worked exactly as intended. They had detected wrongdoing, and the Church had acted. In the third paragraph, he addressed the critics directly without naming them either. He wrote that some voices within the Church would argue for patience, for quiet resolution, for internal handling. He said he understood that instinct. But he also said that the era of internal handling was over. The faithful deserve to know that their church holds itself to the same standards it asks of the world. He wrote, "Transparency is not a threat to the church. Secrecy is." In the fourth paragraph, he asked for prayers, not for himself, not for the church, for the people who had been hurt by the misuse of funds that were meant to serve the poor, the sick, and the vulnerable. The letter went viral within minutes. It was translated into 40 languages within an hour. Catholic social media exploded with reactions. The overwhelming majority were positive. People shared it with comments about a pope who finally had the courage to act. Priests read excerpts from it at evening masses across Europe and the Americas. A bishop in the Philippines said it was the most important papal communication since Evangelii Gaudium. But inside the Vatican walls, the reaction was more complicated. The 3 Italian cardinals who had been organizing resistance went silent, not because they agreed with the Pope, but because the letter had made their position untenable. Any public criticism of Leo's actions would now be seen as defending corruption. The Pope had reframed the entire debate in 4 paragraphs. He had turned a potential crisis into a mandate. Cardinal Rossetti, meanwhile, had retreated to an apartment in the Perioli neighborhood of Rome outside Vatican jurisdiction. His lawyers issued a statement saying he would cooperate with the investigation while maintaining his innocence, but the statement felt hollow. The evidence was overwhelming, and the Pope had not left any room for negotiation. On the morning of July 4th, Pope Leo XIV left Rome for Lampedusa. His advisors had privately suggested postponing the trip. The media environment was too volatile. They said every camera would be looking for a reaction. Every question would be about Rossetti. Leo XIV refused to postpone. He said the trip to Lampedusa had been planned for months. The migrants on that island deserved his presence regardless of what was happening in Rome. And he added something that his chief of protocol would later describe as the most Leo XIV thing he had ever heard. The Church does not cancel compassion because of scandal. He arrived on the island by helicopter shortly after 8 in the morning. The sun was already fierce. The wind carried the smell of salt and diesel from the harbor where rescue boats docked. He was met by local officials, a small delegation of humanitarian workers, and several hundred residents who had gathered at the landing site. He celebrated Mass in an open field near the coast, standing on the same ground where countless migrants had arrived after crossing the Mediterranean. His homily was about suffering, about the duty to see the face of God in every person who arrives on a foreign shore with nothing, about the responsibility of the powerful to protect the vulnerable. He visited the Gateway to Europe monument, a sculpture that had become a symbol of hope and tragedy. He stood before it in silence for nearly 2 minutes. Then he walked to the cemetery where unidentified migrants were buried, marked only by numbers. He knelt, he prayed, and when he rose, there were tears on his face. He did not mention Rossetti. He did not mention the financial scandal. He did not need to. Every person watching understood the connection. A pope who had just expelled a cardinal for stealing 11 million was now kneeling at the graves of people who had died with nothing. The contrast was unbearable, and it was entirely deliberate. Later that afternoon, a reporter shouted a question as Leo walked back to his helicopter. "Holy Father, do you have any regrets about Cardinal Rossetti?" Leo stopped walking. He turned toward the reporter and he said, "My only regret is that 11 million did not reach the people who needed it." Then he boarded the helicopter and returned to Rome. Back in Rome, the forensic audit continued. By the end of July 4th, the team had uncovered an additional layer of complexity. Rossetti had not acted entirely alone. 2 other senior officials within the Dicastery for the Economy had facilitated the transfers. One had provided fraudulent documentation for the Luxembourg Shell Company. The other had manipulated internal audit logs to conceal the outgoing funds. Both officials were identified, suspended, and placed under canonical investigation by the end of the day. The Vatican Gendarmerie also executed a formal request to Italian financial police to freeze the assets held in Rossetti's sister's trust. The Italian authorities cooperated immediately. The villa near the Mediterranean, the apartments in Provence, the vineyard, all frozen, all under investigation. Meanwhile, the whistleblower who had started it all, the mid-level official who had called Giuliano Ferro, was quietly transferred to a protected position within the Vatican's administrative structure. His identity was not made public, but Leo XIV personally ensured that he would face no retaliation. The Pope had given a private instruction to Contrini that was simple and absolute: protect him. He did what our system was supposed to do. Giuliano Ferro, the journalist who had received the original call, published a detailed account of the financial scheme in her Milan newspaper on the morning of July 4th. She did not reveal her source. She did not need to. The Vatican's own public statement had confirmed the essential facts. Her article added context that the Vatican statement had left out: the specific properties in France, the corporate structure in Luxembourg, the estimated total value of the stolen assets. It was picked up by international outlets within hours. By that evening, it had been translated into 9 languages. But perhaps the most significant development on July 4th happened not in Lampedusa and not in the press. It happened inside a small chapel in Vatican City, where a group of 8 cardinals gathered for an unscheduled prayer service. These were not Rosetti's allies. These were moderates, men who had supported Leo's reforms, but who were now grappling with the implications of what they had witnessed. One of them, a cardinal from Latin America, who had known Prevost during his years in Peru, spoke candidly afterward. He said the group had prayed for wisdom, not for Rossetti, not against the Pope, just for wisdom, because they understood that what had happened in the last 72 hours was not just about one corrupt cardinal. It was about the kind of church they were becoming. A church that actually enforced its own rules. A church where accountability was not just a word in a document, but a reality that could end careers and expose secrets. And that realization, he admitted, was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the sun set over Rome on July 4th, the full scale of what had happened in the past 72 hours began to settle in. A sitting cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church had been stripped of his position, banned from Vatican City, his assets frozen, his co-conspirators identified and suspended. The Pope had acted with a speed and decisiveness that the Vatican had not seen in decades, and the most remarkable thing about all of it was the silence. Not the silence of suppression, the silence of acquiescence. No one had tried to stop it. Not Parolin, not the Italian cardinals, not the curial old guard, not even Rossetti himself in the end, because they all understood something about Leo XIV that many outsiders still did not grasp. This was not a pope who governed by consensus when the stakes were high enough. This was a pope who listened carefully, consulted broadly, and then acted with absolute conviction. He had spent his first year building the systems, the compliance infrastructure, the transparency statutes, the reformed watchdog agencies. He had laid every brick carefully and patiently, and when the moment came to use what he had built, he did not hesitate. Some Vatican observers compared it to a chess match. The Pope had spent months positioning his pieces, and when the opening appeared, he moved with surgical precision. Others compared it to his years as an Augustinian friar, a man trained in discipline, patience, and obedience to principle above all else. But perhaps the most telling comment came from a young Monsignor who worked in the Secretariat of State. Speaking anonymously to a Vatican journalist, he said something that captured the mood inside the walls better than any editorial. "We all knew the reforms were real," he said, "but until this week, some people thought they were optional. They are not optional anymore." The story of Cardinal Rosetti's banishment sent a shockwave through the Catholic world. It was discussed in parliaments. It was debated in seminaries. It was preached about in churches from Buenos Aires to Manila, and it raised a question that no one inside the Vatican could avoid. If Leo XIV was willing to banish a cardinal with 30 years of service, what else was he willing to do? The answer, many suspected, was anything necessary. In the days that followed, the ripple effects continued to spread. 2 more senior officials in separate dicasteries quietly submitted their resignations. No public explanation was given, no press conferences were held, but inside the Vatican, everyone understood. They were getting ahead of whatever the independent audit might find. They were choosing to leave before they were pushed. A prominent canon lawyer in Rome published an analysis arguing that Leo's actions were entirely within the scope of papal authority. The Pope, as sovereign of Vatican City State, had absolute temporal jurisdiction, and as supreme pastor of the Universal Church, he had the canonical authority to remove any cleric from any position at any time. There was no appeals court. There was no override mechanism. When the Pope spoke, the matter was settled. Rosetti's legal team attempted to challenge the asset freeze through Italian courts. The motion was filed on July 5th. It was denied within 24 hours. The judge cited the seriousness of the allegations and the cooperation between Vatican and Italian financial authorities. Rossetti remained in his Parioli apartment alone, unreachable. The same man who had once commanded the financial machinery of the world's oldest institution now could not access a single euro of the fortune he had built with stolen money. And in the Apostolic Palace, Leo XIV returned to his routine. Morning prayer at 4:30, Mass at 7, meetings by 8. He did not celebrate, he did not gloat, he did not give interviews or victory speeches. When a close advisor congratulated him on the courage of his decision, the Pope shook his head. Courage is what the whistleblower showed. He said, "I simply did my job," but everyone who witnessed those 72 hours knew it was more than that. This was a Pope who had stood in his private study at 2 in the morning, looked a powerful man in the eye, and said the words that no one else in that building had the courage to say, "You are finished." And he meant it. Some popes are remembered for their encyclicals, some for their travels, some for their theology. Leo XIV, in the span of 3 days, had shown the world something different. He had shown them that the Catholic Church could police itself, that reform was not a slogan, that the man who wore the white cassock was willing to use his authority not to protect the institution, but to purify it. The Vatican would never be the same, and the world was watching to see what he would do next. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us what you think about what Pope Leo XIV did. And stay tuned, because what happens next inside those Vatican walls might be even more shocking than what you just heard.